subscribe and click the bell icon to turn on notifications.
We've made the files the instructor uses in this tutorial available for free. Just click the link below in the video details to get these.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's webinar on Microsoft Project Basics Part 1. I'm so happy to have everybody with us this afternoon. This is a little bit of a departure for me. I normally do Excel training courses, so it's actually really nice to be doing some project for a change. Now, we've got quite a few people on the webinar this afternoon, so I would just like to start out, for those of you who are new to our webinars, just by briefly introducing myself. So my name's Deborah Ashby, and I am an IT trainer and Microsoft subject matter expert. And I've been doing this for a very long time. I've been a trainer for about 11 years, and I've been in and around the IT industry for about 24 years now. So a very long time. I can't quite believe it myself. It makes me feel very, very old. And really, it's my job to design, deliver, and facilitate Microsoft training courses, both online and in the classroom. So hopefully that qualifies me to be in front of you today. Now, before we jump into the session today, what I want to do is just run through a few pieces of housekeeping. So the first thing I'd like you to do is I would like you just to drop into the chat panel where you are from. So I might have to come out of this PowerPoint presentation in order to be able to see that. Lovely, thank you guys. I actually can't see that in the chat panel, which is a little bit odd, but hopefully you're all getting to know each other. I'm sure we normally have quite an international crowd, so I'm sure we've got people joining us from all over the place today. And if you can't tell from my accent, I'm coming to you today from London in the UK. And what I want you to do is just make sure that you can see a screen. So at the moment, obviously, you should be able to see a PowerPoint presentation. And we are going to be taking questions, so you can just drop those into that chat box. Now, it's a little bit difficult for me to monitor that chat box as we're running through the session because I'm so immersed in the content. But fortunately, I have the lovely Mr. Adam Lacey from Simon Says It on the call today. And he is eagerly keeping his eye on that comments box. So if you have any questions with regards to the logistics of this webinar, then feel free to drop those in and Adam can help you out with that. I will say that if you have any questions about project as we go through, I will leave some time at the end to answer any questions that you might have. I'm not sure if Adam's project knowledge is good enough at the moment. I mean, he is very good, but I'm not sure if it's good enough to be able to answer your project questions. So please do just make a note of those and leave them for me to answer at the end.
It's definitely not Deb's. I'm here to learn as well. Hi, everybody. Adam here. Just drop your comments in the box, like Debs was saying, and I'll do my best to answer them. But I think what I'll mostly do is save them for the end for Debs to answer.
Wonderful. Thank you, Adam. And also with this webinar software, again, if you're new to it, the software does work best in Chrome or Firefox. And if you are having a few issues, we always find it's best if you just do the good old reboot. Just close it down and restart it again, and hopefully you'll have better luck that time. So as we've mentioned, questions will be answered at the end. This session is being recorded, so that will be sent out to you. And you'll also see the files that I'm using in the session today will be dropped into that chat window as well for you to download. Now, we are going to start with just a blank project file, so we're going to create that from scratch, but I will be using a couple of other files in the session. So Adam's going to drop those into the chat panel so that you can download. So afterwards, if you want to take the recording, run through it again using those practice files, then please feel free. And I would advise that you do that because it will really help you with your knowledge and help you to understand what we're doing. Lovely. All right, so that's that little piece of housekeeping. Let's just move on to our agenda for today. So what we're going to start out with is we're just going to talk a little bit about what exactly is Microsoft Project and why is it useful. And we're going to open up Project, and I'm going to give you an overview of the start screen, so the first thing that you're going to see when you open up Project. And we're then going to dive into creating our first project. Very exciting. I'm going to make sure that you understand exactly what you're looking at on the screen. So the project workspace and the different views that you're using. We're then going to enter some tasks into our project. I'm going to get you to understand the task properties. And we're also going to start looking at how we can create summary and subtasks, and also linking and unlinking those tasks together, which is a really, really important thing in project. And I will say that last item there can get really fiddly. This is where people start to think, oh, this is a little bit complicated. So I'm just going to try and go through it as slowly as possible. I've tried not to cram this agenda full of stuff like I normally do, because invariably we always run out of time because we only have an hour. So I'm keeping this reasonably short. So let's move on to that first item. I'm just going to take a quick swig of water. Okay, so we're talking about what is Microsoft Project and why is it useful? And you might be thinking to yourself, why on earth has she got a picture of a bride and the groom sitting on a cake in the background? Well, that is because the project that we're going to build today is a plan for a wedding. Now, anyone who's ever planned a wedding will know all of the details that go into planning a wedding. So from the initial planning stages through to things like selecting the attire, the wedding dress, the groom's outfit, bridesmaids' dresses, through to doing things like booking the venue, organizing entertainment, all the way through to the honeymoon stage. There's so many different things in a wedding, which is why I thought it's quite good to use as our demo file in this session today. And I will say that I have taken this demo file from the Simon Says It Project 2016 course, which is available online. And we're just going to scratch the surface today. We really are. This is a very, very large piece of software, and it can get very detailed and very complex. So as I said, what I aim to do is really just give you a foundation for which you can build skills on top of. And if you do want to check out those courses, then please head across to the Simon Says It website, where you can purchase those for a very reasonable cost. Now, let's just talk a little bit about what exactly is Project. Why is it useful and who is it useful for? Well, Project is really for someone who micromanages a series of related tasks, which we call a project. And this person wants to understand everything about the tasks from their inception to their scheduled date of undertaking, to the associated costs of that task, to their final date of completion. And what Project does is it really allows a project manager to see everything that's going on with a project in detail. So not just at a high level overview, they can really get into the granular details of each task. And it allows them to control the flow of a project, the resources, and all of the associated costs. So for something like a wedding, it's probably really important that you get all of your tasks done by a certain date and within a certain budget. And that is where Project can really help you with that. It's also really good if in a work context, if you're having to report back to stakeholders, it will make it a lot more efficient and easier for you to do that as well, using some of the tools within Project. So really, we're doing a wedding plan, but you can apply the steps that I'm going to be showing you to any kind of project that you do. So it might be something that's more business related as opposed to a wedding. But don't worry too much about the subject matter, because the actual steps in Project are exactly the same no matter what the subject is. So really, you want to use Project if you have a series of steps to accomplish in a particular sequence and you want visibility and control over each step. So what we're going to do in the session today, as I said, is we're going to cover the basics of creating your first project. And I will say this is a basic session that's really aimed at people who have either never used Project before, or maybe have a limited knowledge of Project, or possibly even people who would like a refresher on the basics if they've maybe been using an older version. So I am going to start right at the beginning and we're going to work up. Now, I will also say that this session is split into two parts. So this is part one, and we're going to be running a part two of this session in a few weeks' time. So we're going to, where we leave the project today is where we're going to pick up the project in the next session. So if you want to kind of learn more skills, I would say look out for the emails relating to that follow-up session, and we'll carry on with what we build today. So, as I said, not going to have time to cover absolutely everything in a couple of hours, but I'm just going to cherry pick some things which I think will provide a really good foundation, and then you can go on and learn more in your own time. So enough of my waffle. Let's come out of here and let's jump across to project. Now I'm opening project from scratch, so I'm just going to click it in my taskbar. And I'm actually using Project 2019. Now, don't worry if you don't have Project 2019. 2019 is basically very similar to the Office 365, the latest version of Project on there. And also, if you're using Project 2016 or even 2013, there might be some very slight differences, but basically all of these versions are pretty much similar. So you should be fine if you're using any of those versions. If you have anything older than Project 2010, then I would say that this is probably going to be very different, because 2010 is where we switched to the new ribbon format. So anything from 2010 onwards, you should be good to go. All right, so when you first open up Project, this is what you will see, and this is called the Start screen. And what we have over on the left-hand side is we have a recent projects area. Now, I don't have anything listed in here at the moment, and I also have a button here that says Open Other Projects. So if I have a project file saved off locally, I can open that from there. Fairly straightforward. We're probably used to using that type of thing throughout all of the Microsoft applications. On the left-hand side, what we have is a whole bunch of project templates. And these are really useful, depending on what it is that you're doing. I like to use these as kind of like a jumping off point or a good starting point. I think sometimes if you are fairly new to project and you start by creating a blank project and you kind of have to build it from scratch, that can be a little bit intimidating. Sometimes it's a bit nicer to start with a template and just modify that template with the relevant tasks for your project. So what I could do is, if I was looking for some kind of wedding template, I could click in the search bar at the top and type in wedding and click the magnifying glass to search. It will search all of the online templates, and I can see that there is a template available in Project specifically for planning a wedding. And if I click on it, it shows me a little bit more detail about what that's going to look like. Now, obviously, if I was to use this template, my tasks are probably going to be different to the ones in the template, but it just gives me something which I can just go in and start editing. It gives me a starting or a jumping off point. So I would say if you are a little bit concerned about starting from scratch, select a template and then modify it. Now, we are going to start from scratch today because there's lots of things I want to show you from a blank project. So let's just close this down. I'm going to click on the back button, which will take me back to my templates. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select this first template here, which is just a blank project. Right, now the thing I want to point out to you first of all is down in the bottom left-hand corner. I don't know if you saw that little bubble just came up as we opened this. And what it basically said was, this is in manually scheduled mode currently. And you can see in the status bar at the bottom on the left-hand side, it says new tasks manually scheduled. Now, if I click on this, we have two options. We have auto-scheduled and manually scheduled. Now, what I would advise you to do is to put your project into auto-scheduled mode. Personally, I always have it in auto-scheduled mode as opposed to manually. And what that means is that as you add in tasks and as you start linking tasks together, it means that project will kind of adjust automatically depending on the durations of your task and the start and finish dates. If you want to get a little bit more granular and really have the most control, then you may want to do manually scheduled, but I always like to jump into auto-scheduled. So I want to make sure that I have that set before I begin to do anything. Okay, so just make sure that you do check that in the bottom left-hand corner. Now, the structure, let's just take a look at the screen that we're looking at, because I know that even though we're probably all used to working in Microsoft products, each application is a little bit different. So we have that same structure. We still have our ribbons running across the top, our different tabs, which will take us to all of our commands. And obviously all of these commands are related to project. We have a Gantt chart tools contextual ribbon at the top here with a format tab. Now, you might be wondering, why do we have that Gantt chart tools contextual ribbon up? Well, it's because I am currently in Gantt chart view. So I'm looking at my project in Gantt chart view. Now, if you're wondering what that is, it's just a different way. There's lots of different views in Project, different ways that you can look at your tasks and your timeline. I prefer to work in Gantt chart view. Now, if we jump across to the view ribbon, you'll see that the first button there, it says Gantt chart. So I know that that is the view that I'm currently working in. There are a whole host of different views which you might choose to drop into at any given time. But for the session today, we're going to work in Gantt chart view. And what that basically gives me is what you see on the screen now. I kind of have my screen divided into two sections. So I have my table or my tasks list on the left-hand side. And this is where I'm going to be entering in all of my tasks in my project. And then on the right-hand side, we have this timeline. And you'll see as we start to enter tasks in, you'll get a visual representation by the way of bars running across in this right-hand section of the screen. So this is essentially what we call the Gantt chart, okay? And this is the view I love to work in. And again, if you're a beginner, I would suggest using this view. What we also have on here is just below the ribbon, we have this bar. Now, this is what we call the entry bar. And this always reminds me a little bit of Excel. If anybody uses Excel on a frequent basis, you'll know that you have a formula bar running across the top in Excel, which has a little tick and a cross. And this is kind of similar. This is where we can go to edit any tasks that we add into our task table. So we will be jumping in and out of this fairly frequently. Underneath that, we then have a timeline. Now, again, sorry about that. Again, I don't tend to use this too much. There will be times where you might find this quite useful. But again, when I'm first starting out with a project, when I'm entering in my tasks, this isn't particularly useful to me. And it does take up a little bit of room on my page. So I tend to like to get rid of this whole timeline until I need it. So if you do want to get rid of that, if you jump up to your view ribbon, and you'll see over in this split view group, you have timeline currently ticked. So I'm going to untick that and it will get rid of that timeline. It just gives me a little bit more room on the screen. Something else I want to mention, and this isn't specific to Project at all, you'll find this across all of the Microsoft applications, but I always like to highlight it because I'm always amazed how many people don't know what it is and don't use it, and it just saves you so much time. And that is the quick access toolbar. Now you'll find that directly underneath the ribbons and just above the entry bar. So it's where we have these little icons running across here. And you can see I have a few added. I'm actually just going to remove that one just so I can show you how to add it. And what this will allow you to do is you can add as many commands to this quick access toolbar as you like, and it just makes your life a lot easier. So what I would suggest is that if you have commands that you use frequently, that you add them onto your quick access toolbar. It just saves you from sort of rooting around the different ribbons, desperately trying to find that command that you're looking for. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly add something onto my quick access toolbar because it's something that we're going to be using a lot throughout this session. So I'm going to click the drop down, and I have a few of the more popular ones that I can just add by selecting from here, but the one I want to add isn't actually in this list. So I'm going to go to More Commands, which is going to jump me across to my project options where I can go in and customize my quick access toolbar. Now, again, the one I'm looking for is under popular commands. If you're not sure where it's located, you could say all commands to bring up everything, but I'm going to say popular commands. And I have all my commands listed in alphabetical order. So I'm going to scroll down, and I think the one I want is in popular commands. Yes, there it is. I want the indent task. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click add, and you'll see that it adds it over on the right hand side. So essentially it's now added that command to my quick access toolbar. And I'm going to click on OK. And there it is. So it means that I don't have to go and find it in my ribbon every time I want to use it. And as I said, we are going to be using that quite a lot throughout the session today. Lovely. Now, just quickly, so you can understand how you add a task into your first project, you can see here we have a number of columns. I'm just going to click in where it says task name, and I'm just going to enter task 1. And I'm going to press my tab key. Now, what you'll see there is that when I press tab, it automatically fills in for me the duration of the task, the start date, and the finish date. Now, these might be inaccurate, but this is the default. So when you add a task in, it will always give it a duration of 1 day, and it will say question mark at the end. Now, what question mark means is that it's an estimated duration. And what I would say to you is when you're thinking about planning a project and maybe you have a written list of all the tasks you want to add all your tasks in first. Don't worry too much about the duration as you add them. Put them all in, and then when you know exactly how long a task is going to take, then you can go back in and you can change the duration of that task. Okay? Now, what you'll also see is a start and finish date, and I'm going to talk to you about those a little bit more in a moment. But if you cast your eyes over to the Gantt chart, you can see that we now have a small blue line on there. So I'm getting a visual representation of that task, and you can see the duration is 1 day. So it's only showing me a 1 day in that Gantt chart. Okay, and obviously if I was to change this duration, it's going to update on this Gantt chart. So it's a good visual way of seeing the durations, when tasks start and finish, so on and so forth. Okay, hopefully that all makes sense so far. Now, before we move on, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that I save this file, because the last thing I want to do is get halfway through my project and then have something happen and lose everything that I've done. So I'm going to jump into the Backstage area by clicking on File. I'm going to go down to Save As. And I'm just going to save this to my desktop. So I'm just going to click Browse, and I'm going to go to my desktop where I should have a project folder. There we go. And I'm actually going to call this DA Wedding Plan, and we're just going to call it 01. And you'll see that when you save a project file, the file extension you get is .mpp. And click Save. And you can see now I have that named at the top of my project. So all nice and simple so far. Right, let's now get into starting to actually build our wedding plan. Now, what I've done is I've made a list of the main aspects of this wedding plan, so the sort of high-level headings, shall we say, and I've put them into a text file just to make this a little bit easier. Now, I think Adam's going to drop this text file into chat for you so that you can download it. It is quite a short text file.
Yeah, that's been done, Debs. It's in the file sharing tab, which is on the right-hand side. Where the chat is should be underneath the chat on another little tab. Debs, just to warn you, there's a couple of people experiencing a little bit of a lag, so
okay.
Just
Go a bit slower.
Yeah, just keep it slow. If it looks like it's a couple of seconds behind for me as well.
Okay, all right, perfect. Thank you for letting me know. Yeah, sometimes we get a little bit of lag when we're doing these webinars, so I will try and go a little bit slower just to make sure that what I'm saying you can actually see in real time. Now, hopefully you've all got that text file. As I said, you can use this after the session if you want to practice. So these are my high-level headings for my wedding plan. Now, obviously, this isn't going to be everything that needs to be done in this wedding plan. There's probably going to be lots and lots of different tasks which come under these different headings. But this is my basic outline that I want to start adding into project. So I'm going to take the first one, which is planning, and I'm going to add that into my project. So let's go back to our file, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to delete out this task that we added. So if I right click, you can see I have a delete task option. So simple as that to delete a task. I'm going to click in task name and I'm going to add planning. I'm going to press the tab key, and you can see there by default we get that 1 day duration, and I get my start and my finish dates. So you can also see that that has updated on that Gantt chart as well. Hopefully everybody is at the same point as me now. Yes? Okay, good. Now, something else that you can do is I can drag this bar in the middle over to the side or drag it back again. So if I need to see more on my more on my task list, I can, or if I need to see more of the Gantt chart, I can just drag that back in. And I can also do the same for columns as well, much like in Excel. You can just drag those in and out if you need a little bit more space. What you'll also see on here is a line running down your Gantt chart. So there's a green line just running down here. That will indicate the date today. So wherever you are in your project, you'll always have that green line running, which will show you what the date is today. Now, what I'm going to do with this planning task is I think I'm going to change this to, let's say, I'm just going to put that up to 8 days. And I'm just using those little roller wheels just to change that duration. And when I click out, you'll see that the duration has changed to 8 days. The start date is still the same, so it's still today. But the finish date has changed to October the 7th because it's now accounting for that 8 days. And you can see that the Gantt chart has also updated over here. Now, one thing I want to point out about these days, now I've put this to 8 days, and the way that that's represented in the Gantt chart is as 8 working days. So if you were to count these, even though it looks like it's going across the weekends, 8 days is actually just the working days. So we can see there 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's not counting the weekends. Okay, so 8 working days. Now you can change that. How this is kind of set up really depends on the calendar that you have attached to your project. Now I haven't changed my calendar, so I'm just using the standard default calendar in Project. And if you are interested in looking at what calendar you're using, if you go into the Project tab and click on Project Information, this is where you're going to see an overview of the details of your entire project. So it's going to tell you your start date, it's going to tell you your current date, and it's also going to tell you things like which calendar you're using. So you can see there, I'm using the standard calendar. There are a few different types of calendar that you can use. So there is a 24-hour calendar and a night shift calendar. But you can also create your own calendars. So some people might have a working week that isn't standard. So you might work from Tuesday to Saturday. So you might want to create your own calendar which accounts for those working days so that when you're adding your tasks in, it all updates correctly. Now, I'm not going to get too much into calendars in this session. We will cover that more in part 2 of this session, but I just wanted to make you aware as to how Project is working out that duration and which calendar it's actually using. Okay, lovely. So I'm just going to cancel out of there. Now I'm going to add a couple more things into here. So I'm going to add the second task, which is attire. I'm going to hit tab. And I'm also going to add another task that says guests. And I'm going to hit tab. Now, at the moment, I can't see too much information about these tasks, but what you can do is if you want to see a little bit more information, you can double click on any of these tasks and it will take you into a task information dialog box. So if I was to double click on attire, for example, it takes me into this task information dialog box, and you can see in there lots of different things. So if I wanted to edit the name, I could do that from here. It's telling me the percentage that that task is complete. So we haven't really done anything yet. So it's 0. It's telling me it's auto scheduled, start and finish dates, so on and so forth. I have a predecessors tab. Now, predecessors we're going to talk about a little bit later on in today's session. And this is if you have tasks linked together. So if a task needs to finish before this one begins, you would see it listed in this predecessors box. Okay. We then have a resources tab. And again, resources is something we'll cover in part 2 of this session. Tasks will ordinarily have resources assigned to them. Now, a resource might be something like a human resource. So in this example that we're using, the wedding, a resource might be the bride and the groom. A resource might be a bridesmaid. A resource might be a photographer. So those would all be human resources, essentially. We might also have some material resources, so things like bouquets or the wedding rings, things like that. And we might also have cost resources, and you can set all of these up in Project and add them into your project plan. And The reason why you would do this is it just enables you to see things like if you're staying on budget with regards to your costs and things like that. So as I said, we're going to cover resources and how you assign them to your project in part 2. But just be aware that if you do have any resources assigned to this particular task, so say this task was to be done by the bride, she was going to sort out all of the attire for everybody, then you might see the bride listed in this section just here. We then have an advanced tab, and this is where we can do things like if there's a deadline for this specific task, or we can add constraints. And again, constraints will be discussed in the next session. We also have a notes area. So if you want to add a quick note, which people need to see onto this task, then you can add that in there. And then we have a custom fields section, which we won't be covering at all and isn't really something that you'll probably have to come into when you're building a basic project plan. But just be aware that by double clicking on a task, you can jump into that task information and you can see a lot more detail about that particular task and make some changes as well. Now, something else that you need to be aware of are these task ID numbers. So right on the left-hand side, so where you have task mode and then you have that little exclamation point, I should say, we then have 1, 2, and 3 listed in that little area on the left-hand side. And these are your task ID numbers, and they are quite important. Now, in general, when you are creating a project or planning a project, the order that you put your tasks into your sheet, like I've done here, planning, attire, and guests, in general, that will be the order that you carry out those tasks. I think that's kind of the way that the human brain works. If you're planning a project, you think about it from start to finish. So what do I need to do first? What do I need to do second? So on and so forth. So in projects, generally speaking, the lower the task ID number, the earlier in the project that task is. Okay, now you'll see as we start to go through, particularly in the next session, these can get jumbled all out of order depending on what you've done with your different tasks. So that's why it's good to note that the lower the task, the earlier in the project it happens, even if they aren't listed in sequence in your project plan. Hopefully that makes sense to everyone, what I was trying to get across there. All right, let's add a few more tasks into here. And again, I'm just using it off of that text file. I actually have them written down somewhere else, so I don't have to keep switching, but I'm going to add in venue, catering, flowers, memories, details, wedding day, and honeymoon. And enter. I'm just going to take a swig of my water, and hopefully by the time I've done that, if there's any lag at all, everyone will be all caught up and at the same point. Lovely. All right, so now we have all of those top level tasks in our project plan. Now, as I said, these are just top level tasks, or the way that we refer to these kind of tasks in project is as summary tasks. Now, each of these might have some subtasks. So this isn't the entire wedding plan. For example, if we take this guest's summary task, this is probably going to have quite a few different subtasks, shall we say. So for example, underneath this guest summary task, we might have to make the guest list. We might have to send out the invitations. We then might have to finalize the guest list, so on and so forth. So I want to make sure that all of those elements are within my project as well. So what I'm going to do is I am going to add in some subtasks underneath guests. Now, it's very simple. All you need to do is to click on the task below guests, and then there's a few different ways that you can do this, as ever in Microsoft. But if you right-click your mouse, you can see you have an option to insert task. Like so. So what I can do now is I can now enter my first subtask. Now I'm going to click in the entry bar at the top here, and I'm going to call this one make guest list. And you can either press enter on your keyboard or you can click on the little tick in the entry bar. Okay, now at the moment, this isn't really showing as a subtask. It's just showing as very similar to the rest of them that are in here. It looks more like a summary task. So I want to make this a subtask of guests. Now, this is very simple, and this is where we're going to utilize that button that I added to the quick access toolbar at the beginning of this session. So I'm going to select my task just by clicking over next to the number 4 or the task ID. And I'm going to use my indent button, so the indent task button. Now, if you haven't added that to your quick access toolbar, you will find it on the task ribbon in the schedule group. It's just here, okay? So you can click either, like so. And you can see now what happens is that guests is now showing in bold with a little wedge next to it, and make guest list has been indented very slightly. So I can see that that is a subtask of the guests summary task. And you can imagine what you do here. If you've got quite a few subtasks, you can collapse and expand to see or show or hide any particular task or summary task that you would like. So I'm going to add a couple more in. So I'm going to click on Venue again. I'm going to right click. I'm going to do Insert Task. And we're going to call this one, let's see, I'm going to say Send Out Invitations. I'm going to click on my tick. And you can see what's happened here is that I haven't had to indent that one because it automatically inherits the properties of the one above. So it automatically made this a subtask essentially. Now, what I also want to do here is give this column a little bit more room just so that that's all on one line like so. I'm going to add another one. So we're going to right click, Insert Task. And we're going to say Finalize Guest List. You can hit enter, and we're going to add one more. Right click, Insert Task, and we're going to say Book Accommodation. Like so. So now you can see that I can collapse that up or expand it out again. All right. So if you've got a lot of different subtasks in your project and it starts to get a little bit crazy, maybe you only really need to focus on one particular part of the project at a particular time. You can collapse up everything else and just see the part of the project that you're interested in. And I'm going to show you a few buttons in a moment that are going to allow you to do that a little bit easier. Now, the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to increase this make guest list task to 8 days. I'm going to use the little rollers here just to take that up to 8 days. Now, the interesting thing that you should note here is if you look at the Gantt chart, you can now see that the blue bar looks okay. So for our make guest list task, we have this blue bar for 8 days. But if you look just above at the guest summary task, we now have a different format. And it basically shows me the entire duration of all of the subtasks listed below. So guests essentially isn't showing me a duration, it's just showing me a duration of all of the subtasks below it. So if I was to modify any of these, this would update to accommodate. So it basically just gives you an overview of all of the subtasks which come underneath it. And that's why you have a different colored bar in your Gantt chart. Hopefully that makes sense to everyone. Now, a couple of things that I was going to mention at the beginning, which I didn't. I'm just going to go in and I'm going to change the duration of the entire task. I'm going to put that up to 3 days. Now, instead of using the rollers, which can sometimes be a little bit tedious, you can just type in whatever it is that you want in here. So I'm going to use the entry bar again. Now, if I want to change this to 3 days, I can just type in 3D like so and press enter, and that will give me 3 days in there. Okay, and you can see now that the Gantt chart has updated. So this is what I would do. I would go through my project. As I said, it's best to get in all of your tasks and all of your subtasks first, and then once you know the exact durations, go in and start editing the durations. Now, another thing I just want to point out to you before we move on is something about the start and finish dates of your project. Now, say that when I started this project, or when I started inputting these tasks into project, maybe I'm a bit late doing that. Maybe the project had already started or kicked off 2 weeks before I decided to start entering them into the project plan. How could I possibly deal with that? Hopefully you remember a little bit from earlier. If we go into the project tab and click on project information, this is where we can define our start date for our project. So if I wanted to essentially put this project back 2 weeks, I could click the drop down and I could select a start date of the 12th of September as opposed to today's date. So I'm going to set it to the 12th. I'm going to click on OK. Now, what you'll see here is that nothing really changes in your project. The durations stay exactly the same, but now you can see that all of the start dates have changed and the finish dates have updated in relation to those start dates, which is why it's always good to have your project in auto-scheduled mode so you don't have to fiddle around yourself manually updating those. So much simpler just to have project take all the hard work out of it for you. Okay, so just be aware of that. You can change the start date if you need to. What you can also see now is on the Gantt chart, that's also updated. So it's pulled all of those back 2 weeks so that this now makes a little bit more sense. All right. Now you can also change individual tasks as well. So if I wanted to change the attire task to start on a completely different date, I could do that as well. So I could double click on the attire task and I could maybe say I wanted this to start, let's do 2 weeks ahead. I could change that like so. And you can see it's now put that attire task all the way over, almost off the page. But I just really wanted to show you that you can change individual tasks in that way as well, not just those project start dates. Now, you will find that as you start to build up your project, you may have bars in your Gantt chart which are kind of running off the page, or if you have this fairly wide, you might not be able to see all of your tasks without scrolling all the way across. A little trick that I like is I like to go to the View ribbon and click this here where it says in the Zoom group entire project, and that will kind of bring all of your project into view so you can still see everything. I find I'm always using that. I'm always jumping into entire project so I can see everything that I'm doing. Now I want to actually undo that. I'm going to put that attire task back to where it was, like so. Now something else I might want to do, which I find quite useful, is if I go to the, I think we're in the project, I can't remember where it is now, sorry, the format ribbon. Sometimes I do forget where commands are. I'm going to jump across to the format ribbon. And what I'm going to add is essentially task 0 at the top here. Now you might be thinking, what on earth is task 0? We can see tasks 1 to 14 that we already have listed. And I'm going to add a task 0 at the top, which is essentially what we call a project summary task. Now over in this show hide group, we have a project summary task checkbox. So I'm going to click it. And you can see what that does is it adds this at the top. So it basically takes the title of your project, so in this case, DA Wedding Plan 01, and it adds it as a task 0 at the top. So we don't really have any work assigned to it. But I like having this on there because it will basically show you the entire duration of your project. So you can really keep an eye on what's going on. So as you start to build up your durations and your tasks, this will update so you can see exactly when it is that you're going to finish and really get a good idea of when that project is going to finish. So I always like to add that project summary task at the top. Hopefully everybody is still with me there. Okay, now what I want to do with this project is I want to go through and I want to add lots and lots of different subtasks as we've done here for the rest of these summary tasks. Now that would be extremely boring for you to sit there and watch me go through and add 35 different subtasks. So what I've done is I've already done it in version 2 of this file, and that is the file that Adam is going to drop into the chat window to make it available to you guys to download. So if he could do that for me right now, that would be great.
It's coming. 1 second.
Wonderful, thank you.
You can only share one at a time. Sorry, I just had to close the other one down. So that wedding plan's in there. Debs, I think a couple of people missed where you went to get the 0 in. Can you just show that again quickly? Yeah.
Absolutely. So I'm up on this Format tab up here. So where we have Gantt chart tools, Format, and it's over here on the Show Hide group. It's this project summary task just here. Okay. You just put a tick in the box or untick it if you want to remove it.
So the very far right-hand side there, the other side of all those coloured bars, project summary task, press the tick, and you get the little 0 with the first line where you can put your project summary in. Great.
Yes. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I missed that as well, to be honest with you. I think there was a little blip, but great. That's good to see where that is.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, that's one of those things that I find so useful, and it's so hard to find. If somebody didn't tell you that it was there, you probably wouldn't know, but I really find it useful when I just want to quickly see how many days my entire project is taking up. It's great to have that at the top there. So a very useful little tip. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to close down this file. I'm going to switch over to the file that Adam's just dropped into the chat for you, which is basically exactly the same as this. It just has all of the subtasks added underneath the summary task. So just bear with me 2 seconds. I'm going to close this down and I'm going to switch to DA Wedding Plan 2.
That is an actual project plan as well, isn't it? So that's that should open if you've got Microsoft Project straight into project. Yeah, no importing.
Absolutely. No importing. No, it's just a project file which you can just open, and it will open in project as long as you have it installed on your PC.
Great.
Wonderful. All right. So I have a few things in here. Now, you might find that I've possibly removed some of these durations in here. Don't worry too much about that. I think I had planning at 8 days, didn't I? I think I haven't actually added that into here. I'm just going to set these. Again, this isn't too much to worry about. Yeah, no, that's fine. Okay. So I have my file here, and we have added in all of our subtasks, and we saw how to do that in the previous session. Now, this little task mode column that we have here, this is showing me whether it's manually or auto scheduled. If you remember, I said at the beginning, I like to have mine in auto scheduled. If you don't mind that column being there, that's fine. I actually don't find it particularly useful. So I'm just going to right click and I'm just going to hide that column just to give me a little bit less fuss on the screen. Okay, right. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about outline levels. Okay, so now that we have a little bit of structure to our project file, we have our summary tasks and our subtasks. As I said, if you have a very, very long project, and this isn't long by any means compared to some of the projects I've seen people create, this is reasonably short, but it might be that maybe you're just working on the guest list at a particular time, and so you don't really need to see anything else. You can definitely start collapsing up some of these other summary tasks just to make it a little bit easier for you to see. And there is, if you go to the view ribbon, you have an outline button. So in this data group, you have this outline button. So that's going to allow you to hide all of the subtasks of the one that you're clicked on. I can show all subtasks, or I can maybe say that I just want to see all level 1 headings like that. Maybe I want to see level 2 headings. Maybe I want to see all subtasks, which is pretty much the same. So you can really use this outline button to customize what you see. And if you want to do it manually, you absolutely can just by clicking on those wedges. Now, one other thing I've noticed in here is that I don't have my little project summary at the top. So let me just turn that on. So I'm going to go back to Format, Project Summary Task. So I get my DA Wedding Plan 2. And I'm also going to get rid of this timeline like I did in the other file. So I'm going to go to View, and I'm going to turn the timeline off. So things are just a little bit clearer and cleaner and easier to see. All right, so now We've got about 10 minutes or so left, and I do want to leave a little bit of time for some questions at the end. I want to talk to you about linking and unlinking tasks, because this is really, really important. Now, we're going to start to talk through things called dependencies. And what a dependency is, it reflects that something needs to happen before another thing can happen. Okay, so the example I might give would be, let's say in this guest list, I might need to make the guest list before I can send out the invitations. I mean, that's fairly obvious to me. I need to make sure I know who I'm sending them to before I send out the invitations. So the send out invitations task might have a dependency on the make guest list task. Okay, so that's kind of what a dependency is. And I'm going to show you how you can link tasks together and essentially create predecessors or dependencies. Now, before I do that, I'm actually going to add a couple of, a few more subtasks. So I'm going to go to this attire summary task. And where it says select and order wedding dress, I'm actually going to have 3 subtasks underneath select and order wedding dress. So I'm going to click on the one below, right click, insert task, and I'm going to have select wedding dress. I'm going to hit enter. I'm going to add another task, which is going to be order, wedding dress. And then I'm going to have one more, which is going to say measurements and fitting. And I want to make all of these 3, so I'm going to highlight those 3 that I've just added, and I want to make them a subtask of this select and order wedding dress. So I'm just going to highlight them, and I'm going to, on my quick access toolbar, use that indent task. And remember, you can find that on your task ribbon as well, just here. Okay, so now you can see that select and order wedding dress is in bold, and these 3 have been indented. So those are essentially subtasks of the one above. So what I'm going to do now is I am going to deal with task 6 and task 7. So before I can order my wedding dress, I need to select my wedding dress. Makes perfect sense to me. So what I want to do is I want to link these 2 tasks together. So I've selected them both. Again, I'm going to go up to my task ribbon. And in that schedule group again, you have this little chain link button, which when I hover over it says link the selected, I can't say that word, selected tasks. And when I click it, it links them together. Now what you'll see here now is in my predecessors column, can you see I have the number 6 just here? Okay, so in task 7, so that shows me that before this one can start, number 6 needs to finish. Okay, so 6 is a predecessor of this one. And if we look in our Gantt chart, we can see how that's reflected. So it says select wedding dress, and you can see that when that finishes, I have a little arrow and the next task is going to start. All right, so that is kind of how linking together works and how that looks in your Gantt chart. So let's say that the bride has decided that selecting the wedding dress is quite a long process. She's got to go online or maybe look through some catalogs or go to some stores. So this whole process of selecting a wedding dress is going to take about 40 days. So I'm going to type in that entry bar 40D. Ooh. I think that's because I moved the dates on my attire. Don't worry too much about why that's in red at the moment. I think it's because I changed some of my dates a bit earlier on. But we've got 40 days in there, and you can see now that runs all the way across. And then once that is finished, the next task is going to start. Okay. Now, ordering the wedding dress is actually a very quick process. So ordering the wedding dress might just take a day. It might just mean I go into the shop, maybe pay a deposit, sign a form, and the wedding dress is mine. So I'm just going to say that that's going to take 1D. Okay, so all I've really done there is get rid of the estimate. It actually is going to take 1 day. And again, you can see that updated in the Gantt chart. So what you can basically do is you can go through and link tasks that rely on each other together. And I'd love to go into this in more detail, but as always, we are always running out of time. So let me just show you it one more time. So again, if I go down to this guests area, as I said, we won't be sending out our invitations until we have made our guest list. So I might want to select these two and link them together. So again, I'm going up to that task ribbon and I'm going to click on that link chain button. So now I can see that this task won't start until task 12 has finished. Okay, and again, if I look at my Gantt chart, I can see that reflected there. So the make guest list task runs along for 8 days, and then as soon as that's finished, then the next one is going to start. Now, the final thing I want to point out before I open it up for questions, because this session just always goes so quickly, is that every time you have a task dependency, you see this little arrow that you have in the Gantt charts. If you double click on the arrow, it will take you into this task dependency box. And you can see here it says, make guest list, send out invitations, has a finish to start and with no lag. So what it basically means there is that we have to wait for make guest list to finish before send out invitations can start. And there are a few different options here. So depending on what it is that you're doing and how you want this to display, I could set it to start to start. So what that basically means is that send out invitations can start as soon as make guest list has started, or I could have finish to finish, or I can have start to finish. So it really depends what it is that you're doing. Now I'm leaving mine as finish to start, but what I might want to say is that there is some kind of lag in there, and a lag can either be a minus or a plus figure. So what I mean by lag is that, say for example, after I've made the guest list, maybe I want a break of maybe 3 days before I send out the invitations. Okay, so maybe I've made the guest list and I just want to really kind of give it 3 days thought just to make sure that I've remembered to add everybody to that guest list before I start to send out the invitations. I could say I want a 3-day lag. So if I do 3 days, just by using those rollers and click on OK, just look at what that now looks like in the Gantt chart. So this make guest list task is going to finish. I then have 3 days of lag and then the next task can start. And if you look at the predecessors column now in our table, you can see here it's telling me that send out invitations has a predecessor of task 12, which is make guest list. It has a finish to start task dependency with a 3-day lag. Okay. Now, as I said, if I double click back on that arrow to go back into here, I don't necessarily have to have a positive lag. I could have a minus 5-day lag if I wanted to, just by using those rollers to take that down. So what does that look like if I click on OK? Well, there we go. You can see that now the make guest list task will start, and then I can start sending out the invitations part way through creating the guest list. So maybe I start creating the guest list and I'm sending the invitations out as I go. I don't necessarily have to have the whole guest list done before I start sending out the invitations. And then I might want to change the duration of sending out invitations to 10 days, something like that. Okay, and that is how it will look on your Gantt chart. Okay, so lots of different things that you can do by double clicking and changing these options in your task dependency. And I think I'll start the next session just by doing a couple more of these other options before we move into things like constraints and milestones and onto costs and resources. As I said, these sessions always go so quick. That is, I pretty much covered everything that I wanted to cover with you in the session today. I know it's quite a lot to take in, particularly if this is the first time that you're seeing project. So definitely what I would say to you is to go away and have a little practice yourself. Okay, and you can now see at the top, and this is why I like having this 0 task at the top where it says DA wedding plan. I can now see that the duration of my entire project currently is 41 days. Now, obviously, I have to add a lot more detail into here, but I can start to kind of get a rough idea as to when my wedding might take place. So currently, my project is aiming to finish around November. November, I have a lot to add in. So I probably know for certain that my wedding isn't going to be this year at all. It's going to be probably towards the start of next year. So as you build this up, you get a much more accurate detail level as to when exactly that wedding day can take place. Well, hello everyone. It's just coming up to 6 o'clock in the UK, which means we can start our session today. So welcome to today's webinar on Project Basics Part 2. Now, as it says on the tin, this is a follow-up session to Project Basics Part 1. So I'm going to assume that the majority of people that we have on the call today, and it is quite a small niche group, I'm going to assume that you all attended that session that we did back in September. And we are going to pick up from where we left off in that session. Now, if you do happen to be on the call today and you didn't come to that webinar, then don't worry too much. You will still be able to follow along, but just bear in mind that we have done a little bit of work on the project file already. Now, if you do want to go back and review that webinar, then you can access it on the Simon Says It YouTube channel. And I'm going to get Adam to drop the file we're using, or the files, I should say, in the session today into the chat panel. So if Adam could do that for me right now, that would be great. I have the lovely Adam, as always, on the call with me today.
Hello, everyone. Yes, they are being dropped in right now. They're just being uploaded, so they should be with you any second.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So if you do want to follow along in the session today, or even if you just want to save those files off and rerun through this webinar along with the recording that you'll receive after the session, then those files are really going to help you with that. So as always, just a very quick introduction to me. I'm not going to ramble on about myself for hours and hours. So my name is Deborah Ashby and I'm a freelance IT trainer. And it's my job basically to design, deliver and facilitate Microsoft training courses. So that's both online and in the classroom. So without further ado, let's take a look at what we're going to be covering in the session today. Oh, actually, first, before we do that, we'll move on to some housekeeping. I always forget about this slide. If you are on the call, if you can just jump into the chat panel and just type in there, let us know where you're from. Let everybody else know where you're from as well. And obviously make sure that you can see our screen. I know sometimes when we run these sessions, there is a small little bit of lag. So I will try and go a little bit slower just to make sure that you are all in time with me. And as always, with questions, we are taking questions. So if you have any questions related to the webinar, you can drop those into the chat panel. And the lovely Adam is there to answer any questions that you have related to that. If you've got any project-specific questions, even though I'm sure Adam's knowledge in project is amazing, he may not be able to answer your questions. So you can leave those for me, and I'll leave some time at the end for any questions related to project. And as I mentioned, there will be a recording emailed to you afterwards. All right, so now that housekeeping is over, we can move on to what we're going to be covering today. So we're going to start out with just a little bit of a review or a recap of Project Basics Part 1. And we're just going to very briefly recap some of the things that we did. And you will notice that the spreadsheet that I'm loading up first is a little bit more full or complete than where we left off. But I was just utilizing things that we did in that first session. So I just want to explain the spreadsheet to you first of all. We're then going to move into setting constraints and deadlines. We're going to talk about how you can set milestones in your project. I'm going to show you how you can create different phases for a project. And then we're going to move on to something that's really important in project, and that is setting up resources or creating a resource sheet. So I'm going to show you how to create the resource sheet, add your resources, and then add those or assign those resources to your tasks. We're going to talk a little bit about setting up costs for tasks, and I'm also going to talk to you right at the end a little bit about setting a baseline. And as we go through this, I'm going to throw in a couple of other things, so we will briefly delve into the world of reports. Now, as always, we only have an hour. Project is such a huge, complex product that I would say to you that if this gives you a little bit of a taster, I would advise you to access those courses that you do have access to as members. So we have Project Beginners course, and we also have a Project Advanced course. And we have those in, and Adam may be able to help me there, 2019, 2016, 2013. I'm not sure if we have 2010 on there. Do we have 2010, Adam? I can't remember.
Yes, we do. We have 2010 as well for anyone in that version.
Wonderful. All right. So great. So that's what we're going to go through today. Now, we're going to start out with a recap of Project Basics Part 1. And if you remember, we were talking about, or we were putting together a plan for a wedding. And again, this is just a demo file or plan. You may want to relate it more to the kinds of things that you do at work. So it might be a project, an IT project or marketing project or whatever it is that you do. But ours was related to a wedding plan. So let's jump back into Project. And I am going to bring up what we were working on in the previous session. Now, if you remember, what we did in the previous session was we explained what project is and why it's useful, why you might want to use it. And we also started to create an outline for this wedding plan. So we added some top-level summary tasks, and you can see those here. They're the ones in bold, so planning, attire, guests, so on and so forth. We added some subtasks, which are these ones underneath, which are slightly indented, and we saw how to create that structure in that first session. We took a look at the task properties, so when you double click on a task, it gives you more information. And we also had a quick look at Gantt chart view, which you can see here. So this is the visual representation of all of those tasks. We looked at how you can modify the start and end dates of an entire project. And you can see at the top here in task 0, I have my start and finish dates. So at the moment, the way that my project is, it currently starts on September the 26th, 2019 and ends on February the 5th, 2020. And we also looked at, and this was the last thing we looked at, how to create dependencies for tasks and how to work with lag. So just as a quick reminder, in this predecessors column that you can see just here, this is where we have any task dependencies. So again, just as a quick reminder, if you look at this here, so task 8, for example, task 8 has a dependency of task 7, and you can see that listed in the predecessors column. So really, we need to order the wedding dress before we go into the measurements and fitting. And as you can see in this predecessors column, as we scroll down, we have lots of different predecessors that we added. So we discussed those finish to start dates, start to start, and how we can add any lag in there. So this one here, for example, send out invitations. This is dependent on task 12 finishing, which is the make guest list task. It has a start to start finish, which means that send out invitations can start when make guest list starts. And there is a 5-day lag in there, which means we're going to wait 5 days before that task starts. So that's kind of where we got up to in the previous session. Now, you will see that this is slightly different to the file that we left in that last session. And all I've really done in this file is I've added in a few more dependencies throughout this project plan. Now, something that I haven't done is a lot of these dates and timings are still not completely accurate, but we are going to deal with a few of those in this session today as well. Now, the first thing I want to start out talking about is constraints and deadlines. And to do that, we're going to add in a few more dependencies so you can see how those work yet again. Now, constraints and deadlines tend to give you a little bit more control as to when things are happening in your project. And as I said, if you look at the project currently, a lot of the work that we're doing is kind of all squashed up towards the beginning of the project. So I can see that kind of in the Gantt chart. We're very heavy at the front here, but as I scroll through, the tasks tend to tail off a little bit as we move through the project. So I'm probably going to want to take a look at those and maybe spread them out a little bit more. Now, one thing that's really important to do is to identify key decisions in your project right at the beginning. So for example, in this wedding project, if I scroll down right to the bottom and look at the wedding day. So currently, based on everything that comes before it in this project, and again, remember, not all of these dates are set in stone at the moment. Currently, my wedding day is due to take place on October the 7th, 2019. But if I look just 2 tasks up, you can see here, book wedding venue is due to start on October the 17th. Now that doesn't quite make sense because we can't really have the wedding day before we've booked the wedding venue. So there's obviously a few little tweaks that I need to do in here. So what I'm going to do is I am going to say that 2 key things must happen before we set the wedding date. And that is, I must book the reception venue and also book the wedding venue. Okay, so this is kind of a recap of linking tasks together and also creating dependencies. So what I'm going to do is if I scroll up to the top here, you can see I have the task set wedding date. Now, this is going to rely on task 18, so booking the reception venue, and also task 38, booking the wedding venue. So I want to say that before we can set the wedding date, we need to have made those 2 key decisions. So in this predecessors column, what I'm going to do is I am going to type in 18 for task 18, comma 38. So task 18 and task 38 must happen before we can set the wedding date. Okay, and click away. And you can now see on the Gantt chart that updates just there. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to link together the set wedding date task and also the send out invitations task, because send out invitations can't happen until we've set the wedding date. So I'm going to link these 2 tasks together. And if you remember from before when we did this, if we jump up to the task ribbon, in this schedule group, we have a link button. It looks like a little chain link. So I'm just going to link those 2 together. And you can now see that send out invitations in the predecessors column now has a 3 on the end to tell me that that's linked to task 3. So that's kind of a little bit more of a recap on just linking and setting predecessors. So now that we've done that, we are in a little bit more of a realistic position as to when we're going to send out those invitations. Now, there are still a couple of things in this project plan which need dependencies. So, for example, if I scroll to something like this, plan and finalize seating arrangements, this is going to need to rely on task 14, so finalizing the guest list. So until I know who's coming, I can't really plan and finalize those seating arrangements. Okay, so I'm going to select finalize guest list. Sorry, I'm going to select plan and finalize seating arrangements, and it's going to have a predecessor of task 14, again, which I'm just going to type in to that predecessors column. Okay, so we've set up a few more things in there. Again, we covered that in that first session. Let's move on now to talking about constraints. Now, to demonstrate this, I'm just going to insert a new blank task above this planning task. So I'm going to highlight planning. I'm going to right-click my mouse, and we have in there an insert task option. So let's insert that task. And what you'll see here is that if you look in the start date for this task, by default, it's going to insert any new tasks at the project start date. And if you want to check what your project start date is, if you go to the project tab, you'll see underneath project information, you can click in there and you can see there what your project start date is and also what the current date is. The finish date is also listed there. It's kind of grayed out because the finish date is very much controlled with what you have set up in your project plan. So this is probably going to change as we start to add more tasks, as we start to edit our durations. And you can see that everything currently is scheduled from the project start date. So with that in mind, I'm going to double click on this new task to go into the task information. And I'm going to jump across to that advanced tab. Now what you'll see in here is that for this task, we have constraint types, and you can set constraints on any task that you have or any task that you add. Now by default, you'll find that it will default to as soon as possible. So when scheduling from a start date, the default will be as soon as possible. And generally, this is the one that you're going to want to use because normally we're trying to get this project completed as soon as possible. You will see in there, if you click the drop down, you have a number of different options. I'm going to utilize one of these in an example in a moment. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these. What I'll do is leave you a little bit of kind of homework, I guess, for that. If you want to find out more about constraint types and using them in project, you can jump into the help file. So if you just type in constraints, go into project help, and you can read through what each of those mean. But I will say that the most common one is as soon as possible. We're going to use one of these in a moment. So hopefully that all makes sense. Now, as I said, jump into the help section to read about those. But the one example I will show you, a different way that you can use this, is let's suppose that one of our bridesmaids is working overseas. And she's not going to be available for the select and order bridesmaid dresses task until the beginning of January. So if I cancel out of here and find my select and order bridesmaids task, okay, so currently that's scheduled to start on November the 14th. Now, one of our bridesmaids isn't going to be around until January. So essentially, this task can't start until the 1st of January, or shall we say the 2nd of January. I don't think anyone wants to select bridesmaids dresses on New Year's Day. So what we might do here is jump into this task by double clicking it, go to our advanced tab, and we might set a constraint here. So if we click the drop down, and I might say start no earlier than, and then in the constraint date, I can then select the date where I want this task to start. So I might say January the 2nd. Okay. Now you'll see when I click on OK, that's going to have quite an impact on this project. So now there's a bit of a delay on this task. So it doesn't start now until January the 2nd, and it runs all the way through to March the 25th. So just bear in mind that when you are adding in constraints, they can have quite a heavy impact on the overall scheduling of your project. So because that's been pushed back by about 6 weeks or so, it's going to push my entire project finish date back that same amount of time. Okay, so just be aware of that when you're going through this. Hopefully that all makes sense to everyone. Now, what you can also do here is if I jump back into that task, if you do add something like a constraint, I would always recommend jumping across to this notes tab and just adding in there some information about why that's been pushed back so that anybody else who's looking at this project file kind of understands what you're doing. So I might want to say something like Jane working overseas until the 2nd of Jan, and click on OK. And you can now see in that information bar, so in the first column here where we have indicators, you can now see that that task has a little note icon there. There's also a calendar icon there, which is telling me that there is a constraint on this task. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. So think about that when you're working in project as well. Now we're going to move on to talking a little bit about deadlines. And deadlines are somewhat similar to constraints in many ways, but one major difference is that a deadline is an easily visible physical marker on the Gantt chart. Now, another difference is that constraints are used in scheduling and can affect the length of an individual task and the overall project. Now, we just saw an example of that when we changed this select and order bridesmaid dresses task. It really had an effect on the finish date of that project. So in general, constraints can affect the scheduling, whereas deadlines tend to not affect the scheduling or the timing of the project. So let's take a look at a deadline in action in our project plan. Now, if possible, we would like this wedding to be at the end of summer, maybe because of the weather. We don't want it to be too hot, but we don't want it to be too cold either. So again, if I scroll down through my project plan and go to wedding day, and let's just take a moment to review that date. So currently my wedding day is October the 7th. Now, I'm not particularly happy with that. As I said, it doesn't make too much sense considering some of the other task start dates that we have above. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a deadline on this task. So I'm going to open up wedding day. And I'm going to jump into that advanced tab again. And you can see here we have a deadline option, which currently says NA. And we have a drop down which opens up the calendar. Now I'm going to say I want this wedding to occur on September the 1st, 2020. So I'm going to scroll through my calendar until I get to that date. I'm going to select September the 1st and I'm going to click on OK. Now, I can't see that on the Gantt chart because it's so far in the future, it's kind of gone off the page. So I'm going to scroll across a little bit. And again, I still can't see it. So another little tip, another little thing you can do here if you're having trouble seeing things, if you jump up to the view ribbon, in the zoom group, you have entire project. And if we click that, I should then be able to zoom across and there we go. I can now see my deadline marker and it's that little down arrow just there. If I hover my mouse over it, it's telling me that that is a deadline for this task. The deadline is September the 1st, 2020. So really what I want to make sure here is that as I'm adding tasks and setting dates, I don't really want anything to move to the right of this deadline marker. Now, if I am going through and adding things in, and it does move beyond this deadline of wedding date, then I will be notified of that. So project will pop up in this indicators column, which is this first column in our little table here. It will let me know that I've gone over my deadline date. Okay, so just be aware of that when you're adding deadlines in. Now, as I said, this is a purely visual deadline marker. It doesn't have any effect on the scheduling whatsoever. All right, let's scroll back up to the top of our project. So I'm just going to delete this new task that I added in. So I'm going to select the task, right click, and we have a delete task option in there. So very simple to get rid of any tasks that you no longer need. Now, I want to talk to you a little bit in this next section about different phases of a project. And in terms of project management, projects often have different phases. And you can see at the top here, we have planning. Then underneath that, I have agree budget and approach and also set wedding date. Now, in general, we would want to agree the budget and approach first before doing anything else in this project. So there's going to be a lot of decisions that need to be made before we can do anything else. So for example, I need to work out how much money we're going to spend on this project, or this wedding in this case. I need to think about if it's going to be a small wedding, maybe a small intimate affair, or maybe a much grander occasion with hundreds and hundreds of guests. So this task 2, is probably going to be a precursor to everything else in this schedule. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to rearrange my project just so it's a little bit easier to read, a little bit easier to see. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this top level planning task. I'm going to get rid of that. Actually, before I do that, and this is an important point actually, if you try and delete this as it is, you're going to get this little planning wizard error, and you might see this pop up from time to time. Now, it's telling me that planning is a summary task, which it is, and it says deleting it will delete all of its subtasks as well. So just be aware of that. If you do try to delete a top level summary task and you click OK here, it's going to delete all of the subtasks. Now, in this case, I don't want to do that. I just literally want to delete that planning task. So I'm going to cancel. And what I need to do is I need to select the two tasks below, and I need to just outdent them because currently they're indented, which means they're subtasks of planning. So I'm going to go to my task ribbon. And again, in the schedule group, you can see I have my outdent task and indent task. So I'm going to outdent both of those, which means that they're no longer subtasks. So I can now safely go in and just delete planning because essentially now it's just a regular task. Now, what I'm going to do is, because agree, budget and approach needs to be done before we do any of these other tasks, I'm going to set task number 1 as a precursor or a predecessor to all of the rest of the project. So what I might do is go to the first subtask here, the first summary task, attire, and in the predecessors column, I'm going to add the number 1. And I'm going to do that for all of these summary tasks. So just go through and add a number 1 next to all of these. Now, I will say, you can probably see I get a little drop down here. Now, I think this is new for 2019, but I will just show you, for anybody who does have a copy of 2019, you can click this drop down and it will allow you to link to any tasks you like, which is a nice little feature. But I know that most of you probably aren't using 2019, hence why I am kind of staying away from that at the moment and just adding these in. So this is basically saying that all of these are reliant on that task number 1 at the top here. All right. Now, another thing I might want to do is, everything looks a little bit squashed out. I haven't got it organized very well. So I might want to just separate out these top 2 tasks, because really these need to be done before we do anything else. And there's a handy little way of kind of doing this and arranging things in your spreadsheet. So I keep saying spreadsheet, project plan, I should say. Now, if we click on task number 1, what I might want to do is put a blank row in between this project title and this first task. And if I go up to the format ribbon, sorry, not format, I can never remember where this is, the task ribbon, and go to this task drop down in the insert group, you have an option for blank row. So that's just a nice quick way of inserting a blank row just there. And I might want to do the same just here and insert another blank row. So it really just organizes it a little bit better, allows you to separate out those top 2 tasks from the rest of the project. And we're going to come back to this in a moment, where we're going to, again, look more at how you can split this up into different phases. So we will come back to this in a moment. What I'm going to move on to talking about now is milestones. And again, milestones are used to denote significant points or events in a project. And a milestone in general has a 0 duration. So it doesn't have a 1, 2, 3 day duration. It can do, but in general, milestones are just a 0 duration marker denoting a significant point in the project. And milestones can be used for a number of different reasons, and one of them being that if you need to provide management or maybe key stakeholders with a snapshot of the project, you might want to pull off a milestone report which will show them high-level progress, how you're moving through the project. Milestones can also or might also be associated with payment schedules. So for example, we might have a milestone of when we need to pay the photographer or the venue. So we're going to add some milestones into this project. Now, as I mentioned, a milestone does have 0 duration, so it is assumed that there is no work associated with the milestone. So for something like set wedding date, which we have at the top here, this would be more of a milestone as opposed to an actual task. But I have 1 day duration assigned to set wedding date. So I don't really want to go into this task and set it as a milestone because it's going to take that duration down to 0. Now, if you are happy with that task being a 0 duration, then that's fine to do it that way. But what I might be more inclined to do is to add another task which says wedding date set and use that as my milestone instead. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the blank row below. I'm going to right click and I'm going to insert a new task. And I'm going to call this wedding date set. So I'm going to go up to my entry bar at the top here and we're going to type in, wedding date set. And I can click on my tick or I can click on enter in order to set that. So this task is going to be my milestone, essentially. Okay, it's a statement of something that's happened rather than something that's happening. So to set this as a milestone, all I need to do is double click on it. And again, in this advanced tab, there's a couple of different ways that you can set a task as a milestone. So at the bottom there, I have a mark task as milestone option. Now, if I was to use this will allow me to keep the duration of the task. So as I said, a milestone doesn't necessarily always have to have 0 duration. If you want to mark something as a milestone which has a 20-day duration, you would come in here and you would use this option because it doesn't change the duration of the task. However, if you do just want it as a milestone, so something that has no duration, the best way to set it as a milestone is to set this duration down to 0 days. So you can see duration in the top corner here, and I've just used that roller to put it down to 0 days. And when I click on OK, and we need to scroll along a little bit, she says, where is my milestone marker gone? Let me go back into there. Sorry, it should bring up let me mark it as a milestone just here as well, just to see. There we go. For some reason, I don't know why it didn't. Normally when you set it down to 0, it will put the milestone marker in, but I've had to click that milestone checkbox as well, it seems. So there we go. That's what I was looking for. This little diamond icon just here. So that will denote any milestones that you have in your project. So now what we're going to do is, now that we've set this milestone, I'm going to link the wedding date set to the set wedding date task. Okay, so I'm going to select this task, hold down my control and select set wedding date, and I'm going to link them together. So again, up to the task tab, into the schedule group, I'm going to click our little link icon just there. Okay. So very easy to set milestones, and we are going to do a couple of other ones as well. So another thing that we might want to do is, if I scroll down to task 20, where we have book reception venue. Now, I might want to set this as a milestone. So after I've booked the reception venue, I may want to insert a task that says reception venue booked. So that's what we're going to do. Same process. I'm going to select the task below, right click, insert task. And up in our task entry bar, I'm going to say reception venue booked. Like so. And we're going to set this as a milestone. So I'm going to double click. Oops. And let's try setting that down to 0 days again. So I just see if I'm going mad or not. Let's do okay. There we go. You see, I don't know why I didn't do it on the first one, but I've just moved those days down to 0 and it's marked it as a milestone. And again, I might want to go in and link those two tasks together. So I'm going to select book reception venue booked, and then link together. Okay, and you can now see that predecessor in there, predecessor of 20. Okay, so very, very simple just to add in those milestones. Now, another milestone we might want to add in would be the wedding day task. So again, if I scroll down to wedding day, I'm going to double click and I'm just going to mark that as a milestone as well. So I'm going to use the mark task as milestone in there and click on OK. And there we have our milestone marked. So really, really very simple. So you might find as you go through your project and you're marking various different milestones, sometimes it's quite nice to be able to see just the milestones in your project. And of course, there is a handy little utility that you can use for that. So if we jump up to the view ribbon, in this big data group, we have a little filter here. And if I click the filter drop down, there's lots of things that you can select, but one of them is milestones. So if I select that, it's just going to show me all of those milestone tasks. So sometimes if you want to get a bit of an overview, it's good to look at it in that way. I also mentioned that there are various different reports that you can run. And again, these are the kind of reports that you might want to run off each week or each month to give to your managers or key stakeholders. And there are so many different reports that you can run in project. We're not really going to go into them in this session, but just to show you very briefly, if we jump across to the report tab at the top here, this whole section is related to the different kinds of reports that you can run. So if we click some of the drop downs, a lot of these are probably not going to mean too much to you. And I will leave you to have a little look into this if reporting is something that you're interested in. But underneath the in progress drop down, we have a milestone report. And if I click that, it's just going to pull that information through and produce a little report for me. Now, obviously, our project isn't complete. We don't have a lot of those dates or durations set, so this looks a little bit strange, but just to give you an idea of the kinds of reports that you can pull off. So that might be something that you're interested in. Now, you can see it's opened this report, and you might be thinking, well, how do I get back to my Gantt chart view? Remember, in the bottom right-hand corner, you have your different views that you can switch between. And the first one here is Gantt chart view. So I'm going to click that icon, and that's going to take me back to my milestones. Now, if I want to clear these milestones, again, if I go back to view and go back to this filter, click the drop down, I'm just going to select no filter, and that's going to bring everything back into view. Now, another thing that we've had on the screen here the entire time we've been working, which takes up quite a bit of room, is this timeline running across the top. Now, this timeline can be really useful. And again, this isn't something we're going to look at in the session today. But at the moment, I'm not really using this. It's just kind of taking up space and getting in the way. So I might want to turn this timeline off. And helpfully, we're already on the view ribbon. In the split view group towards the end of this ribbon, you can see I currently have timeline ticked. So if I want to get rid of this timeline, I just uncheck that box and that timeline will disappear. And that just gives you a little bit more room. All right, so we're building up our project little by little. We've added some constraints, some predecessors, we've added some deadlines, we've added some milestones, and we've seen how we can run off a report and also view those milestones. One important thing about project that we haven't really touched on yet is resources. And resources is a really vital part of project. Really, tasks and resources are the building blocks you need for any project. Now, resources can take many different forms. So they might be a people resource. So that would be one that's required to do work on a particular task. So in this case of a wedding project, even though we wouldn't really consider it to be work, the bride, the groom, the bridesmaids, those would all be people resources that are required for tasks in this project. We can also add material resources. So again, in the case of this wedding, I might consider something like the wedding rings to be a material resource. If you were doing something like a building project, which kind of makes more sense, you might use materials for your building project. So bricks would be a material resource. Concrete would be a material resource. And then the final resource that you can add is a cost resource. And usually cost resources are services, so people providing services to your project. So again, for this wedding plan, a cost resource might be something like the photographer. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to set up all of the resources that are involved in this project, and then we can assign those resources to individual tasks. And some or all of those resources might have costs associated with them. So let me show you how to use the resource sheet, and we'll jump in and we'll add some resources. Now, we're currently in Gantt chart view. And again, if you cast your eyes down to the bottom right-hand corner of the screen where we have all of our different views, you'll see as I hover over them, we have task usage, team planner, and we have one that's called resource sheet. Okay, so if we click on resource sheet, you'll see that currently it's blank. We don't have any resources. Now we're going to start to add in a few into here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add in our bride. So she is a resource on this project. So I'm going to type in bride. I'm going to press my tab key, and it asks me to select the type of resource. So as I just discussed, 3 types of resource that you can add: work, material, or cost. Now, this is a bit misleading in this particular project because I'm going to select work for the bride, even though she's technically not doing any work on this project, as in she's not charging for her time. Again, if we were doing a different kind of project, so the example would be something like a building project, if I'd added a resource like an electrician, the type would be work, but the electrician would probably have a standard hourly rate, which I would fill in this standard rate column. He might also have an overtime rate to add in as well. So think about if there are costs attached to your resource. In this case, there isn't. She is a resource. She does need to work on the project, but she's not charging for her time. All I need to do now is I need to add in some initials. Now, the initials column is how is this resource going to appear on your Gantt chart? So when it says bride, I could have it saying bride on the Gantt chart. I might just have it saying B or some other code that I want to use. Now, in this case, I'm happy with it just saying bride. Now, a lot of these other columns have defaulted, so I'm going to keep their standard rate as 0, overtime rate as 0. Max, now this says 100%, that's what it's defaulted to, which means currently when I assign the bride as a resource, she's doing 100% of the work, which I'm happy with at the moment. Now, some of these other fields, cost per use, if there was a cost per use of the bride, then I'd put that in. That's not really related to this. The accrual method, again, if we had costs associated with this resource, we could select when we want to pay. So at the moment it says prorated, which means kind of spread throughout the life cycle of the project, or we might choose to pay at the end or pay at the start of the project. Again, this doesn't really come into play in this case because she's not charging for her time. And then the final column is just telling us which calendar that resource is using. And by default, it's set to standard, which is a standard 8-hour working day. And again, calendars is something you might want to research after this session because we're not going to have time to jump into that today. So for the bride, I don't really have to add too much information. I just want her in there as a resource. I'm going to add the groom in the same way. And he's going to be very similar. I'm going to keep him as a work resource. His initials are going to be groom. And I'm going to keep all the other columns as they are. I'm going to add another resource, but this time we're going to add the wedding rings. So I'm going to type in wedding rings. And I'm going to mark this down as a material resource. I'm going to give it the initials of rings, so that is how it's going to appear on the Gantt chart. You can see that the columns that haven't been filled out are ones that we don't need to complete for this particular resource. There's no standard rate because it's a material resource, but there is a cost per use. So there's going to be 2 rings, obviously, and each ring is going to be $500 each. I'm just going to say that. That's probably a little bit cheap, but we'll just put that in. $500 for each of the wedding rings. And we could choose when that is accrued. So this is probably going to be accrued towards the start of the project. Let's add one more resource in here before we start assigning them. I'm going to add the photographer. I'm going to press the tab key, and the photographer, as I mentioned, would be more of a service to this project. He's providing a service, his time, his photography skills. So we're going to set the photographer up as a cost to the project. I'm going to give him the initials of photo. And again, I might decide to come back and choose when I'm going to accrue this. It's probably going to be towards the end of the project once we've seen what those photos look like. Now, I'm not going to add a cost in for the photographer because I want to show you how you can do this at the point of adding them into the Gantt chart. So that's all I'm going to set up as my resources. And you can have loads and loads of them in here if you want to. So what we're going to do now is we're going to start adding some of these resources or assigning them to different tasks in our project. So I'm going to jump back to the Gantt chart. So again, down to the bottom corner, I'm going to click on Gantt chart to switch back to here. Now, what we're going to do is this task here, task number 2, where it says agree budget and approach. Now, currently the duration for that is 1 day. Now, I'm going to assume that it's going to take a lot longer for a couple to agree on their budget and the approach to the entire wedding. So I'm going to change the duration on this task. I'm just going to put that up to 10 days, like so. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to assign some resources to this task. So I'm probably going to have both the bride and the groom assigned to this task because they're both going to be involved in agreeing what their budget is and what the approach to the wedding is going to be. Now, when it comes to assigning resources, as always in Microsoft, there are a few different ways that you can do this. So the first way is if you right-click your mouse, you'll see that you have an option just here for assign resources. And that's going to bring up this assign resource box. And you can see all the resources that we added in here. So I'm going to select the bride. She's already selected. And I'm going to click on the assign button. Now, when I do this, watch what happens to the Gantt chart. So I'm going to click assign. And you can see she now appears assigned to this task. I'm then going to click on groom and I'm going to assign. So I now have both of those resources assigned to that particular task. And I'm going to click close. So super simple to add these people in. Now, when you do add resources, you can see here that I've actually got this little warning come up. So I've got a little green dog ear or triangle appear in the corner of that task and a little warning symbol. Now, if I click that, why that comes up is because this is one task and I've just assigned 2 resources to it. So effectively, because there's 2 people working on this task, it might take half the amount of time. So basically, project is asking me here, if I want to change anything, if I want to reduce the duration but keep the same amount of work, or increase the amount of work but keep the same duration. So it gives you a choice of what you can do there. I'm just going to select this middle option. Now, just to show you kind of what's going on here, I'm going to add another column into my project plan. So I'm going to highlight the duration column. I'm going to right click and I'm going to select insert column. And this will allow me to select another column of information. Now, what I want to see displayed in here is the amount of work that's happening on each task. And there's so many different columns that you can have, but I know that mine's called work, and these are all in alphabetical order. So I'm going to scroll all the way down to the bottom, and I'm going to find the work option. Now, what you can see here is that task, agree budget and approach, is currently 160 hours of work. And the way that works that out is that it's a 10-day task. It's based on a standard working day of 8 hours, which would give us 80 hours. And we have 2 people working on the task. So that's how it comes to that total of 160 hours. So sometimes this column is really useful for working out how many hours you have on a particular task. Let's look at assigning something else or another resource to our tasks. So I'm going to scroll down to the select and book photographer task. And I'm going to assign the photographer to this task. Now, again, we could right click, but another way that you can assign resources is to jump up to the resource ribbon at the top, and you have an assign resources option. You can also see as I hover over, there is a shortcut key to bring up that box of Alt F10. And we get exactly the same box. Now, if you remember with the photographer, I didn't actually assign a cost to the photographer, but if I wanted to, I could do it at this stage. So maybe now that we've booked the photographer, he's told us how much it's going to cost. So I'm going to add in here 1,500, and I'm going to click assign. And you can see now if I close that, we now have the photographer and we have the amount in brackets afterwards. Okay, so you can add costs at point of adding them as well. I'm going to add one more resource. So we're going to go to the select and buy rings task. I'm going to right click and select assign resources. And you've probably guessed what we're going to do here. We are going to assign the wedding rings. Now with this one, I'm going to do it slightly differently. There are 2 wedding rings. So in units, I'm going to say 2 and click assign. And you can see there it's picked up from the resource sheet the cost of the wedding ring, which is $500 each. And the Gantt chart has updated with wedding rings and then 2 in brackets. What I also might want to do here is because both the bride and groom are going to be assigned to this task, I may want to assign them as well. So I can go back in, select the bride, assign, select the groom, assign, close. And now I have multiple resources assigned to that particular task. Okay, so hopefully that shows you how you can set up a resource sheet and how you can assign those resources to different parts of your project. Now, something else I want to talk about is separating tasks into different phases. So as I mentioned before, we need to set the wedding date, and the wedding date relies on all of the tasks before it being completed. So down here we have our wedding day currently October the 21st. Now, the way that I'm going to do this is I'm going to separate out task 42 and task 43. So the rehearsal and the wedding day, I'm going to separate out and put them at the bottom because these are the 2 things that are going to come right at the end of the project. And literally everything else in the project needs to be done before we go for the rehearsal and before we have the wedding day. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy and paste these 2 tasks from here just to underneath the rest of our tasks. Now, one thing that's really important to know is if you start copying and pasting tasks is that you need to make sure that those tasks are outdented first. Okay, so I'm going to select them. I'm going to go to the task ribbon and I'm going to use my outdent button to outdent them. Okay, so then I can do a Control X to cut them, and I'm going to paste them down here. Control, oops. Let me try that again. Control V. No, let's back. What did I do wrong here? Let me try that again. That should work. I did outdent them enough, didn't I? Let's try that again. Yep, they can't be outdented any further. Let's try Control X. There we go. I think I was clicked in the wrong place. So we can just paste those in down at the bottom. And what I essentially want to do, or what I'm trying to achieve here, is I want to say that basically everything else needs to be done before these two tasks can go ahead. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll up to the top of the schedule. And I'm going to go to this attire task. Oops, let me select it. And I'm going to insert another task. So I'm going to right click and select insert task, which will give me a new task just above attire. And I'm going to rename this task, or I'm going to give it a name of preparation phase. And you could split your project up into as many phases as you like. We're just going to do one so you get the kind of idea. And there we go. We have preparation phase at the top here. And what I'm basically going to do is make everything that comes below it part of this preparation phase. So I'm going to highlight all of the tasks below, except those bottom two. And I'm going to use my indent key, and I'm going to indent those tasks. So they now become subtasks of the preparation phase. So essentially what I can do is I can use the little arrow here and collapse up that preparation phase if I want to. And then what I can do is at the bottom here is I can say that these two tasks rely on the entire preparation phase, so task 6. So I can come down here and I can add into here rehearsal relies on task 6, and also wedding day relies on task 6 as well. Okay, so you can add those in like that. So you might want to think about when you're looking at your project, separating it into preparation phase, all the different kinds of phases, and then linking to that particular phase for the things that need to come right at the end. Okay, so what I'm trying to get across to you here is you really need to think about how you're going to structure your project in a way that makes it really efficient when you're working within project as well. All right, we've got about 6 minutes left, and I have a couple more things that I want to show you. Now for this, I'm going to close down this file. So I'm going to click on close, and I'm not going to save the changes. And I have another file open behind it. So this is really a progression of the file we were just looking at. So there's a couple of differences here. I've been through and I've filled out a few more of these dates. And you'll also see that I've added a lot more resources to this particular project. Now I'm going to jump straight across to the resource sheet. So remember again, the last icon here in the status bar says resource sheet. And you can see I've added a whole host of different resources. So I think we got up to photographer in our last example. I've added the rest of these in. I've set up a lot of these as costs to the project. And you can also see that a lot of these, the accrual is set to end. So we won't be paying until the end. So the interesting thing about accruing at the end is that because this payment will be incurred at the end, it means that they're assigned to tasks which would accrue at the end. So what I mean by that is if we jump back to our Gantt chart, and if we go down to something like this one, let's say this one here, reception venue, or sorry, book reception venue. If you look at the Gantt chart, you can see there, that is where we have the cost assigned. So it says $6,600. So that cost resource has been assigned to book reception venue. It hasn't been assigned to reception venue booked. Okay, so again, you need to make sure which tasks you're assigning your cost resources to make sure that you assign them to the right one when that cost is actually going to be incurred. And because I've set that resource up as accrue at the end, it's going to be charged once we've booked the reception venue. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. I know sometimes it's a little bit difficult to understand what's going on there. Now, another thing you might want to do, or another column that's quite useful to add into your spreadsheet, particularly when you start dealing or adding cost resources into your project, is to add another column for cost. So if I click this column here, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to right click and we're going to select insert column. And again, from here, I'm looking for cost, and these are in alphabetical order. So I'm going to scroll through and we're going to select cost. And this will give you an idea of the overall costs of your project. So I can see currently the overall cost is somewhere in the region of about $30,000. And I can see the rest of the costs for each stage or each task on my project. So that is sometimes a really useful thing to add in to your project plan. Now, there is another way that you can view different costs, and that is to go into the project tab. And if you go into project information, you have a statistics button at the bottom here. So if you don't want that cost column in there and you just want to have a quick glimpse as to where you're at, you can jump into here, click on statistics, and that will show you the current costs on your project. All right, now just to finish up, because we've got about 2 minutes left to go, I just want to talk to you briefly about setting up baselines. Now, baselines are a snapshot of a project at a particular point in time. So as I said, I've filled this project out quite a bit. I've filled in a lot of the dates. I've got a lot of the costs and resources in there. So I might look at this project as it currently is and say, okay, I'm fairly happy with how this looks. This is how I'm going to proceed. This is what I intend to do. So I might want to take this point in the project as the baseline. And then I'll measure any further any further progress in this project against that baseline. And you may want to have multiple different baselines throughout the life cycle of your project. So I might want to take this as a snapshot or a baseline. And then as the project progresses, in a couple of months, I might decide to take another baseline and measure progress from there. There's up to 11 different baselines that you can add. And we're just going to add one because it is very easy to add them. Now, one thing I will show you is if we click on the View tab and go to this Tables drop down, we have a More Tables option in here. And I want to switch to this Baseline option. I'm going to click Apply. And you don't have to switch into this, but I just want to show you this is a different way of viewing it in relation to any baselines that you have set. Now, because I haven't set a baseline or taken a snapshot of the project currently, all of these totals are currently 0. Now, you'll see that when I set the baseline, when it takes the snapshot of the project as it is now, a lot of these fields are going to populate. Okay, so let's go up to the project tab. And you can see in the schedule group, we have a set baseline option. So I'm going to select set baseline. And as I said before, you can have lots of different baselines. So you can see here, there's 11 of them that you can have. So I can set up a baseline. I normally just select the first available one, like so. I want it to do a baseline or set a baseline for the entire project. And I'm going to click on OK. And notice when I do that, it's going to populate all of these fields with the current figures of my project. So if I click on OK, there we go. All of these have been populated. So that's my current baseline. I could then go and carry on working on my project. And then in 2 months' time, I could go and set another baseline. And if I come up to here and set another one, you can see that's my current baseline. It says last saved November the 21st. I could go in, I could select the next one and set my next baseline if I wanted to. So you can do it throughout the life cycle of your project. Now, baselines are really useful to track progress on a project. Now, that's not something we're going to go into here, but it is something that I would say is good for you to have a little read into. And just to finish up, I have kind of put onto a slide just some things that I think would be good further reading. So again, look at more at setting up costs, tracking progress on a project, and also setting up calendars. We haven't spoken a lot about calendars because it is such a big topic, but it's definitely very important and something you should look into. And also reporting, particularly if you find yourself having to report progress on projects back to managers and key stakeholders. So those would be my 4 main things that I would read about after these 2 sessions. As I said, this project or this subject is so huge. There's so much that we could talk about. I would recommend that if you do have to use project, really go through our beginners course that you have access to and our advanced course. They go into everything that I've gone through in much greater detail. Thank you so much for joining. I hope you all enjoyed that. I hope you all learn at least one thing that you think is going to help you. Have a great night, a great afternoon, a great morning, wherever you are, and I will see you next time. Bye, guys.
If you're not a subscriber, click down below to subscribe so you get notified about similar videos we upload. To get the files the instructor used in this tutorial and follow along, click over there. And click over there to watch more videos on YouTube from Simon Says It.